with ALOC. And I've had the privilege of having so many conversations with educators across the globe with a common intention of making the work environment, the learning environment, a better place. And I guess I have to say this, the final intention is to make the world a better place. It all starts with things that are not visible. And firstly, thank you for joining me to discuss a topic that is probably very much neglected. And the fact that it's neglected just perpetuates the discrimination that is behind the cause of microaggressions. So while we try to define it, it is necessary to understand where it roots from. So I'm going to use the analogy of the iceberg. And I believe, and through my research about microaggressions, this is where we stand. We are at the tip of the iceberg. So let's start with that. As always, with any presentation, there is an introduction. And by introduction, it is related to what I'm going to speak about. How do I like to introduce myself? With all of us, we have professional tags attached to our introduction. I usually say I'm a mother, a daughter, a friend, a woman of color, because that defines me better than all the professional accolades or the designations that come along with what I do at various places. I'm really proud of the fact that I've lived in 5 different countries across 2 continents, and I've had the experience of being a curriculum coordinator. I have some knowledge as a college counselor, and I'm also the editor of the International Educator, TIE, and this gives me a perspective into international education, which is very unique because I hear voices from across the world. But does it truly define me? And how is that linked to microaggression? And why am I talking about this topic? So I'll just rewind and take you into where I truly belong or where I come from. And this is a picture of my mother and my father. My mother was the first graduate in her family of 13 children. My father was an Indian Army doctor. Why it's necessary to know, because that was the beginning of my journey into this world. And they are my first teachers. What they taught me was one simple idea, and that's kindness. This idea has helped me survive. And I use the word survive, which I feel is strong, in an international context, in an international environment, which we value so much, but it's not very easy to navigate. So how is kindness related to what we are going to speak about? A bit of background. Since my dad was in the Indian Army, we were posted in a beautiful country, which is Bhutan. And that's where most of my childhood was. I had to move back to my home country to complete my high school. That's the first time probably I felt that something was not right in the way people were behaving or accepting me, or the way I was looked upon, because every time I met someone, because of the way I speak, because of the way I could not speak the local language, I didn't have the proficiency, I was asked a question over and over again, which is like, oh, where are you from? Where did you come from? At that time, I didn't think much about it. But one thing for sure, I was very uncomfortable answering that question. Because I didn't have a single answer to that question. And I would like to compare it to this illustration by the famous cartoonist and illustrator, Simon Kneebone. And you can imagine how I would have felt, or how anyone feels when they are not able to describe, or when they're not able to understand why are they asked these kind of questions. Where are you from? Look at the context here and look at what's happening. And is it really necessary to ask these kind of questions? With that thought in mind, let's move on to the topic. Microaggressions, simply put, are camouflaged insults. And this is what I believe is the easiest way to describe it. Some of these camouflaged insults that I've heard are, you don't look like a desi, You don't look like an Indian, an Asian. All lives matter. You're hired to represent diversity. Something like, do you have a husband? Yes, it really matters. If you're a woman, it really matters. People do ask you that. Imagine. Where are you actually from? Even statements like, let the man pay the bill. Something hidden behind these phrases, these questions, which make you feel a bit uncomfortable. And that's the point which you need to understand something is not right. And this is at the surface level. So we haven't even gone deep into why these phrases exist. Why do we accept these questions? Why are we asked these questions? So there are two ways of looking at it. Are you an aggressor or are you an aggressee? Let's start with, are you an aggressor? At the micro level, and I'm going to ask you to think for a minute or to realize this situation when we use certain phrases like, oh, that's so retarded. According to this research and this experiment done in the University of Rutgers, you were asked to be a person on the other side. For example, if you are a person who has a disability and you are in a conversation where this phrase is used again and again, that's so retarded. How does it make you feel? If you are a survivor of a sexual assault and then somebody uses this phrase, that exam just raped me. I mean, I'm speechless. If you are a member of the LGBT community and you have to deal with statements like, that's so gay. If you are an undocumented citizen and you have to listen to phrases like, those illegal aliens. Have you ever perpetuated this kind of phrases, these kind of questions? Something to think about, something to reflect on and think, have we been an aggressor? The next point, are you an aggressee? At this point, I would like to hear your thoughts. And through this process, what we are going to do is we are going to understand the different kind of microaggressions, the different categories that exist. So I would like you to scan this code or just type this link. Maybe what I can do is I can click on this link and copy the link in our chat. And that will be the easiest way for everybody to access it. So if you just click on this link, it'll take you to a page which has different categories of microaggressions. I want you to look at the different categories and think of situations, of phrases, of questions that have been asked to you as an insult and start listing them here. I'll give you maybe 2 minutes to do this. Please let me know if you're able to access this Padlet. Just a thumbs up is enough. Okay, thank you. Someone's in, so I am expecting that everybody can access. It's public. You can decide to comment on it anonymously, or you can just use your own accounts to comment on it. So what I'm asking you to do is think of any gender-based microaggression or insult that you've experienced. Questions, phrases, statements that have been made based on what environment you're in, and you felt uncomfortable answering them or even facing those questions. Okay, why do you talk like a white girl? Amazing. You speak so well for a Black person. Great. You are getting the hint. And yeah, let's give us 1 more minute. Yeah, you're cute for a dark-skinned girl. You're so skinny. Yeah, body microaggression. Yes. Categorizing everyone and then insulting people for being who they are. You don't look like an athlete. Reinforcing biases. As a female from a male, you're being difficult. Yes. Is she even qualified for that job? Yeah. Gender-based microaggressions. Okay, so we've given it some thought and we've given it a bit of time. As we can see right in front of us, it's very easy to identify racial and cultural microaggression and to some extent gender microaggressions. But the verbal insults that exist, and we tend to overlook them, the behavioral microaggression, we tend just not to overlook them. We are at a stage where we don't even identify them. And that's why this conversation is necessary. I'll show you I showed you an example of a similar activity that I did in the past, and it'll give you an idea of the kinds of microaggressions people come across in everyday workplace or even in your environment, even though you don't work in your social circle. Let's look at some environmental microaggressions. That place is nice, but it's very local. I hear houses in Africa are huts. Cafeteria does not have diverse food options. Did you ride a camel to school? The foreign food section at the grocery store. Comparing a teacher's ability to handle stress with no acknowledgement of environment BIPOC anti-racist teachers in racist spaces had to deal with. Vacancy, native English speaking teachers only. Typical Asian international school. Oh, it's truly international schools. They have X number of white teachers. So some kind of microaggressions that exist in our workplace, and we never even consider addressing them because we never talk about it. Behavioral, being talked over or explained, mansplaining probably is a great example of that. Expecting women on staff to do the food and the soft jobs of meeting repeatedly. Has this been addressed? Is there any policy which helps you to address this? In fact, my question to you is, why do we need a policy? A policy is mostly for conflicts that arise that we can foresee and we want to prevent ourselves from such situations. Why do these situations need to arise? Why have we ever not thought about it? How we behave, what we say, is it right? Why should it be accepted? That's my question. So this gives you an idea of the kind of microaggressive attitude that exists in our workplace, in our education environment, where students are supposed to learn for the better future. And what are we actually perpetuating? So let's go back to the presentation and where we were. Just give me a minute to, sorry. So the next instant, from the tip of the iceberg, we are going to move to the surface level. The surface level, I would like to compare it to a polar bear. A polar bear from a distance looks nice and fluffy and cute and cuddly, but we have to realize that it is dangerous. And it comes with experience. Probably human beings learned with experience that if it looks nice, cute, and cuddly, it's not necessarily harmless. What is at the surface can be misleading. It's actually macro. And the macro impact can only be gauged as we dive deep. Why is it macro? At this instant, I would like to read from one of my blogs when I initially started researching about microaggressions. This is what I could describe it as. Microaggressions are like dementors from the Harry Potter series. They suck away the happiness, ambition, and zeal to succeed. This silent killer leaves you with no other option than to perish silently, or even trying to make a difference. In fact, it is such a silent killer that it has become an accepted norm across the world by completely ignoring the root cause. Unfortunately, the attitude that exists currently is, yes, it exists, deal with it. That's exactly what we do in everyday workplace. We talk about it, we even laugh about it, but we have never ever thought of addressing it. What you need to realize, it's dangerous. It's taking away from you who you truly are. So be aware, make people aware that this is not acceptable. So when I say it has a macro impact, let's look at what research says. According to research, the stress that microaggression leads to is actually macro, is massive. There are 4 kinds of recognized effects of persistent microaggression. First one, biological and physical effects. These small stress lead to a trauma-like effect, a major catastrophic trauma-like effect. Every day you have to tolerate this kind of behavior, and it leads to a trauma-like effect. The second thing, emotional effect. Isms affect emotional well-being, psychological adjustment, and mental health. This has been discussed many times. I don't need to get into details. Cognitive effects. This is something probably we haven't thought about. Trying to make meaning of incidents. That's what we always keep doing. We always try to justify. Probably they didn't understand what I said, or maybe it was a joke. It has to stop being a joke. Disruptive cognitive processing. It actually affects how you think and your productivity. Stereotype threat. Identity disengage from interest. Because you have been stereotyped, you start disengaging. Behavioral effects. Hypervigilance, skepticism, self-doubt. Forced compliance. Sometimes you try too hard to fit in. Rage and anger. You're angry and it comes out on things that you haven't imagined. Fatigue and hopelessness. Adaptation to adversity. That is, you are limited to survival skills. You just exist. You've accepted this kind of insults and you just exist because probably you have a paycheck, a salary that comes in every month, and you think that there is no solution to this kind of behavior. From surface level, we are going to dive a bit deep into the iceberg below the tip. So in the deep diving, as per a recent survey done by SurveyMonkey, it seems that the most common type of microaggressions are these 3 microaggressions. Now, I would like you to reflect, take a minute and share with me. And here is a time when you are speaking with me. I've done enough speaking for the past 20 minutes. Now I want you to speak, but I'm going to help you, and it's not going to be easy. Why I say this is what I'm asking you is, this is invisible and this is macro. We are going to reflect and see, have we been a part, have we been guilty of kind of leading this kind of microaggression? So have I ever said, I'm reflecting right now, that someone's unprofessional based on how I stereotype them or based on my idea of professionalism? I did reflect on this, and there's something I'd like to share, and I'll invite you to share the same with me. I used to work in a software industry at the very beginning of my career. My work hours were 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. in the evening. I started thinking, this is a normal work hour. These are the timings we must adhere to. There were people who would leave at 5 o'clock, completing their work. When I shifted my profession, I would always look down on people who left on time, thinking that, unprofessional, they just leave. And there was a time when I had to check that, when I realized this is the kind of bias that exists in me. And that's why the kind of insult that I put out there is by saying these people are unprofessional. So I hope I made sense, and I would like you to take a minute and share with us, has this ever happened? Have you been a perpetuator, or have you unconsciously kind of participated in being somebody who insults without realizing, just because you have some preconceived notions? So take a minute, think about it, and please share with us. Okay, so I don't hear anyone, or I don't see anything popping up in the chat. So I'm gonna ask you to share instances where you have experienced microaggression, which is related to these three categories.
Shwetangna, I'm happy to share. I didn't know if you wanted us to speak.
Yes.
One of the things that when you were speaking had me thinking about, and I've reflected on in the past, is sometimes intergenerational conflict in the workplace. And as somebody who's getting older and at times supervises people and they seem to get younger and younger, I think that I hold some biases related to age, actually, and how people who are younger might approach the job, or how they might set boundaries that I never set. And so seeing people in different generations hold different boundaries and hold different expectations, I think it's kind of maybe a little too easy to dismiss that as age or unprofessional. And so just you giving that example was really helpful, because that made me really reflect on that. And for me, I think some of it really comes around generations in the workplace.
Yeah. Thank you so much. That's so beautiful. And honestly, it was one of the hardest tasks, because every time I do this, it's not easy for us to reflect on how have we been the aggressors. And this is the whole idea. The objective of discussing microaggressions is to reflect on our own practices, on probably challenge the biases that we hold unconsciously or consciously. And this is an excellent example. It might seem very trivial at this level, but what happens is it turns out that it bothers the aggressor more than the aggressee. So what we are harboring, the biases that we are harboring, is ultimately damaging our own sense of belonging, our own sense of acceptance. And that's why it's very necessary to dive deep. Thank you so much, Stacey. That was really, really helpful. Yeah, Renee, go ahead, please. I invite everybody to speak.
Thank you, Shwetangna. I want to speak to being spoken over. So, I'm working in a school context where we aim to have norms of collaboration, use structured protocols to guide our conversations. I will say I find it challenging when folks do not follow the protocol, and I will often, in order to redirect, have to speak over them. I'm not sure if this is an example, a key example, but to speak over them to get us back on track with following the protocol, because if that's not done, the conversations are taking out to the left field, and it diverts us from what we're supposed to be focusing on. But I also find that when folks are unfamiliar with structured protocols, they will also speak over other people. But if I am facilitating, let me put it in that, say, if I am facilitating, I may speak over someone to at least affirm what they're talking about, but then remind them and bring them back in alignment with the protocol. That makes sense.
Yep. It does make sense, and it's very interesting, actually. What you're raising here, you're doing a deep reflection. Not necessary that it stems from a microaggression. You're probably facilitating a conversation. But again, the thing is, even me, after doing so much of research, I'm not able to tell you whether it's based on a bias, or whether you're just trying to facilitate, because it's so hard to identify, right? You're probably trying to facilitate the conversation so that it follows a structure. But
Yeah.
what are you basing your interruption on? That matters.
Mhm.
Does it make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does make sense. And I find that I'll base my interruptions on when we're deviating away from what the focus of the protocol is, to also just be a reminder. Part of, what sounds like what you're discussing right now really connects with another area. Let's pause and continue, so I'll try to use that language as well.
Exactly. So using a language and realizing that this can be taken as an insult by the other party, by the other side, is a great way to improve our own strategies, isn't it? And that's exactly what you did right now by sharing. In fact, when we go to the macro level here in the next slide, we'll realize where these stem from, and that'll probably answer your question. I have other people raising their hands. Okay. Being spoken over. Renee, you already contributed. Rosa says that I can't talk, you've lost your voice. That's fine, we respect that. Feel free to use the chat if you have something to share. So if nobody else wants to share, can we move on? I'll just give it 2 seconds, maybe. Somebody wants to speak. Okay. Whenever you're comfortable sharing anything, please raise your hands. The whole idea is to learn from each other. So these bars are color coded. Why? This is where the coloring comes from. It seems that microaggressions are situated on the 4 pillars of discrimination based on gender, sexuality, race, and the other categories are all combined together. Now, let's look at an example and how to read this graph. Based on research from the Carnegie Mellon University and University of Michigan, this is what was found when people across universities in the US were surveyed. Objectification, if we look at objectification and why does it happen? Mostly it's gender-based. So our aggressions of objectification root from how we identify gender. Another interesting one is the criminal status. It's always or mostly associated with race. These are the discrimination, these are the biases that exist in our society. Stereotyping, look at stereotyping. Mostly because of gender, race, maybe sexuality, and others, maybe. The other one, which is very interesting, is alien in your own land. When you have to prove where you belong, it's completely to do with racial discrimination. So identifying where your aggression, where your question, where your attitude stems from, where is it coming from, will help you understand whether this is an aggression you hold or you are just carrying on with your everyday work in situations that are tricky, which Renee, you just explained. So going back to what is the root cause of your action is very necessary to understand. Another one that I would like to discuss very quickly is the myth of meritocracy. This is also based on race. We identify certain races with being more academically sound or more able or more skilled. Unfortunately, it still exists, and it's mostly dominated by how we discriminate with race. So let's look at the other. What other things are grouped together when it comes to microaggression? Alien in your own land. These are some examples. And on the top, this is from the survey. Where are you from? People are not comfortable answering that question. Please don't ask them. If you genuinely want to know where people are from, ask them how many languages you speak, where would you like to travel, what their interests are. That is a much better way of knowing people than just kind of stereotyping, kind of making boundaries based on their passport. Ascription of intelligence. Something like asking an Asian person to help with a math or a science problem. This just shows that we have biases. It has nothing to do with the person that you're speaking to. This is something which we need to check ourselves. Color blindness. When you say there's just only one race, the human race, you're completely overlooking that fact that we are all different. And the idea is to coexist with this difference. There is a difference and we need to deal with it. And when I say deal with it, deal with our own feelings of how we accept difference. Criminality, assumption of criminal status. A store owner following a customer of color around the store. Unfortunately, these things happen every day. Denial of individual racism. Very interesting. As a woman, I know what you go through as a racial minority. Just kind of generalizing everything, so not identifying. Myth of meritocracy. I just discussed this very briefly. Everyone can succeed in the society if they work really hard. I believe the most qualified person should get the job. These are statements that assert that race has nothing to do with life's successes. So we are completely overlooking it. Communication styles, pathologizing cultural values. To an Asian or a Latino person, why are you so quiet? To a Black person, why do you have to be so loud and animated? Just calm down. This is the aggression we hold, stereotyping we hold as people. Second-class citizen. Most common phrase, you people. Environmental microaggression, overcrowding of public schools in communities of color. This is an existing problem. Have we ever addressed it in terms of the root cause? Overabundance of liquor stores in communities of colors. This is a perception that's being built by even companies, racial profiling, consumer profiling. How to offend without really trying. I'm not going to read this. The reason being, I feel like I'm saying the F word. That's how offended I get when I see such phrases. So I can't bring myself to speak them. You can read and realize how dehumanizing it is. And I would like to say here and remind us that microaggression is an attitude of silent aggression, apathy, hate, discrimination towards minority or lesser represented communities. This is a definition available online, but it's just at the surface level. It doesn't cover a lot of things that we are discussing today. So I'm going to go a bit deep. I'm going to help us to identify. One of the questions that I was asked was, how do we identify whether it's intentional or how do we categorize? Because unless we identify it properly, it's hard to address it. So it seems that there are three major categories of microaggressions: micro insults, micro assaults, and micro invalidation. Micro insults are something which are unconscious. And this is basically conveying that a person is rude and insensitive. At this stage, probably something can be done about it. People can be made aware. Micro assault is conscious. It's on purpose. It's an attack. And this requires support of the community. An individual person cannot fight against it. That is why we meet and talk about this. We raise an awareness. Micro invalidation, it is often unconscious, but it's defined as verbal comments or actions that exclude, negate, and nullify your thoughts as a person, most importantly, your lived reality. your experiential reality. And that brings me back to my discomfort, where all these questions stem from. Why do people have to ask me where I am from? And if you are asked that question, you should also try to address it. How does it look like in international workplaces? I would like you to take a minute and look at it. We talked about three things: micro insults, micro assaults, micro invalidation. Can you identify any of these statements as a micro insult, as a micro assault, or a micro invalidation? I'll give you a minute just to read, and if you're able to identify, that's fine. If you're not able to identify, that's fine too, because you're forcing yourself to think. Yeah, I'll come back to this question. There's a great question in the chat. So are you able to identify any of these statements as a micro insult, micro assault, or micro invalidation? So let's look at one statement, yeah? Leave your cultural baggage outside. What do you think? Is it a micro insult or it's an assault? You think it's intentional or unintentional? And I'm inviting you to speak.
I would say that's intentional.
I think so too, because you are directly claiming that you have a cultural baggage, right? You're already judging people and then you're insulting them. So that's how we start identifying. And that's how when we ask ourselves these questions, then I'll go to Constance's question in the chat where you're asking, what about the question, where do you call home? I feel in international schools, it's hard to not be curious about who's around you and from where they come, not necessarily putting them into boxes based on it though. Yes. Where do you call home? How does it make you feel if somebody asks you that question? Anyone? I'm gonna reflect. I'm gonna say, where do you call home is a question I would like to answer. For me, for example, I've worked in East Africa for a long time. I was out of East Africa for a certain period of my professional journey, and I intentionally came back to East Africa. So if somebody asks me, where do you call home? I really would like to say East Africa is my home. And I feel proud in that. So I don't feel that there is an intention, a negative intention in asking that question. So that's how I will approach it. I will see if that's identified as an insult or an assault, and I'm not able to identify it as an insult or an assault. So I think it's all right to ask that question. Where do you think home is for you? And that talks about where you belong, right? And you can explain yourself and you can talk about it. And probably you're proud of where you belong and you can say, but where are you from is trying to categorize you to a certain place. And that's it. It's not talking about home. It's talking about a region, a place, a country, which doesn't define who you are. A passport doesn't define who you are. That's what I'm trying to address. So moving on, in international education, in college and tertiary education, research done with students for microaggressions, 51% of students experience some kind of stereotyping in the classroom, and 39% felt uncomfortable on campus because of their race. So race comes out as a major reason for these microaggressions to exist. What we need to understand is this much high population of students face it, can't identify it. They always said it's uncomfortable. And we expect these people to change the future. When they can't identify it, how do we burden them with that responsibility? So should we not raise awareness about these experiences, about these insults? Should we not make them stop? Deep dive. This is something I really, really like, and this is based on all the research. Microaggressions, it seems, undermine our power as a woman, as a person of different race, different color, as a person who's just different in a setup, in an environment. Our power impacts our behavior. Our behavior impacts how we are perceived. How we are perceived impacts the opportunities we receive. And our support and opportunity impacts our progression. So you see how deep it is, how it impacts you overall. Starting from undermining your power, who you are, it leads to not supporting your progression. Probably it stops you from progressing in your life because you have always tolerated this kind of aggression, this kind of insult. So let's take a deep breath and look at what we can put in place in international schools. This is based on a lot of conversations and my personal experience as an international educator. I put it up as an infographic. I call it restorative justice in international schools. With some training, with some professional development, I realized that this is probably a strategy. Microaggression. In this scenario, we can see that a physically challenged student is in a conflict. Probably there's a microaggression which students hold with people who are physically challenged. In consequence-based practices, what do? We investigate individual students who made that insult or who created that conflict. We name and shame the student aggressor. The next stage is we send an email to inform the parents, your child was involved in this incident, this is unacceptable, as per the school policy, this is what we are going to do. We suspend the student, we send a warning, probably even put it up in the report, in the behavior management report. What happens in this case? That little microaggression turns into a macroaggression. That child continues to hold the grudge, hold the bias that they have against people who are different. What will happen if we have restorative practices? In this incident, let's have a whole group student meeting. Let's name and shame the aggression, that it's not okay to look down upon people who are physically challenged. Not the aggressor, not the person who created the conflict or said something wrong, because they are not aware, they are misinformed. It's coming from a place where the awareness didn't exist. And the place is either the school or the home, and we are the perpetuators. Maybe have focus group discussions, allow the students to reflect. Students do a self-reflection on why the aggression is not right and realize why they should not perpetuate it. This reduces the aggression. This stops it instead of having consequence-based practices. This is a way forward. This is something we can implement in our schools if we are faced with such situations. And we can agree or disagree when we discuss in a minute. Other frameworks for addressing microaggressions in the workplace, and this is from the Harvard Business Review. They came up with this framework. If there's a microaggression that exists in your workplace, could be intentional, could be unintentional. It's necessary to identify that. If it's intentional, disarm it, then defy it. Finally, decide what you have to do. But there has to be a course of action. If it's unintentional, you can decide whether you want to defy and make a decision how to move forward, or you can discern. It is necessary to understand why discern. Sometimes you need to understand how much you want to invest in that microaggression and who's the person perpetuating it. Same example of students. They are young citizens of the world. They have not been informed. So how do you address it? Do you discern it? Do you look for an opportunity when it can be addressed properly? Or in situations where you rather feel empowered to do what you want to do when you want to do. So discern when it's unintentional. Disarm, interesting. If you choose to confront a microaggression, you know it's intentional, be prepared to disarm the person. Make them aware that this is not acceptable. Defy it. Use a probing question like, how do you mean that? If you feel uncomfortable with a micro insult or an insulting phrase towards you, please make sure you disarm the person. You say, you ask them, you confront them. It's necessary for them to understand that they were wrong. And in the process of explaining this probing question, probably they'll realize what was the mistake. Finally, decide. You control what this incident will mean for you, what you will take away from this interaction, and what you will allow it to take away from you. What you allow will continue. So you need to take a decision how to stop this. So a very simple framework for action for stopping microaggressions. Now, the other strategies are name it, say that it's not okay. Claim it. You have to tell the person you're not comfortable with it. Stop it. Please stop using sexist language. This happens a lot in the workplace every single day. Please don't make racist comments. It's not a joke. It's not at all a joke. It's a bias. Recognize, understand your privileges and bias and behave accordingly. Challenge colorblind ideology. That's very important. And call out these kind of jokes. They need to stop immediately because it perpetuates that culture of micro insults. Embrace an intersectional lens for all aspects of your life. Very necessary. It starts from us reflecting on our practices. In this situation, in this scenario of microaggressions, we cannot blame it on other people. We have to start from self-reflection and introspection. Finally, it's time to surface. And with all of this that we discussed now, how can you make a change? It's very easy to discuss something and forget about it. But what's that one little thing that we discussed today that you will implement in your workplace or in your life from today onwards? I would like you to share with all of us. Maybe using the chat is a better option because maybe we don't want to speak so much, and that's fine. So please use this chat to let me know, to let everyone know, what is that one little change you think you can make after having listened to all these causes of microaggression, strategies that we can put in place, restorative practices that we can have in our school. Please go ahead and share something in the chat. I'll answer a few questions that are popping up in the chat in a minute. Okay, Nikki says, being much more conscious of the words I use. Thank you. I absolutely love the fact that you're self-reflecting. That is a massive achievement, because in all these cases of discrimination, we always put the blame on the other person. So what have we done to stop it is something we need to assess. I'm now aware of my own language. Thank you. Again, a self-reflection. Stacy says, I think you have to develop a commitment to addressing what you hear rather than letting it go because it's easier. Thank you so much. Always finding an easier option of blaming it on the environment, on the society, on people, on race, on caste, on religion. But what have we done to address it at our own level? Very important. Renee says, sharing the restorative practices with our middle school section. I'm thinking MSS middle school. Maybe I could be wrong and you can correct me. From the graphic. Okay, thanks. From the graphic you shared, there are a lot of consequence-based practices. And honestly, this is not me preaching. It's just based on experience where I've seen that it aggravates the situation. It doesn't resolve it. So it's worth trying a restorative approach. The resources are helpful with the DEIB committee at my school to plan for professional learning this semester. Thank you. And I'll share all the resources with you so you can run the same presentation and have the same conversations. I have said some of these statements and it wasn't intentional, but I'm sure I have caused harm. That's huge, Renata. I'm happy you're reflecting to that extent. But just realizing that just empowers us to be more aware. Nikki says, making sure that when I confront microaggression, I'm not doing so with aggression, as this can make people defensive, not receptive. Such a beautiful thought. I feel like copying everything and framing it somewhere. I just hope we don't lose all these beautiful reflections. Please save it somewhere. And this will remind you what we agreed upon, what we decided. Before we end, I'd like to share something that's a little personal, but I think it's necessary. That's how we should be. One of the things I've learned as a leader is being vulnerable. The ability to make a change only comes when we are vulnerable. And all the reflections that I just read, you just exhibited that characteristic. You are vulnerable, you are capable of making a change, and that's what makes you a leader. And for me, I started with the quest of where are you from? And I'll end it there. I read this beautiful book, and I'll go back to my first teachers, my parents, who taught me kindness. And in one of the many book reading sessions with my parents, we came across this book, which is Where Are You From? Written by Yamil Saeed Mendes. And she says, with beautiful illustrations in all the books that she writes, I'm reading from one of the pages, and this is exactly how I feel it should be. The question was, where are you from? They asked, is your mom from here? Is your dad from there? They ask. I ask Abello because he knows everything. You come from the pampas, the open free land, he says, from this land where our ancestors built a home for all, even when they were in chains because of the color of their skin. You come from the sunshine that lights our path in this world, the rain that washes away our mistakes. But Abello, I ask, where am I really from? Abello laughs. You want a place? He points to his heart. You're from here, from my love and the love of all those before us, from those who dreamed of you because of a song sung under the Southern Cross or the words in a book written under the light of the North Star. You are from all of us. I am, you are from here. And that's exactly what I would like to tell people, that I am from here. And the place here is the same for all of us. And honestly, it makes me emotional when I read this, but this is exactly what I would like to say to anybody who asks me, where are you from? And I hope that resonates with you too. So let's just take a moment and think about the change we are going to put forth. We reflected on this, but the practices that we are going to put in place after having this conversation. This is the end of the presentation, and I would like to invite everyone to share or ask questions or just indulge in a conversation for the next 5 minutes. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can see each other. Okay, probing question. We talked about the changes that we would like to see in place. One thing we have established is deep reflection into ourselves and what are we doing when we meet this kind of an attitude. The other kind of tool that you have with you is the restorative practice, which you can put in place in your school. So let me ask you a simple question. Have you ever been part of this kind of a conflict where it's very consequence-based, and has it really helped you resolve the issues? So I'm
Can you
gonna,
repeat that, Shwetangna, please?
sorry? Yeah, I'll repeat that. Thank you. So have you ever had a situation like this where there's a conflict and you've had a consequence-based approach? And has that been successful? You never
I'm
know it. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm thinking about when you were sharing all the different microaggressions, there was one that kind of connected in the recruiting practices. Right now, many international schools are recruiting, and I have been in spaces where I am facilitating or leading recruitment initiatives. And there was a statement that you had underneath the myth of meritocracy. Did I say that correctly? And I've heard that statement before by principals when looking at candidates. And I find I'm in conflict with them in terms of what their approach is and what they're looking for. So I will specifically ask, what is it that we're looking for? Because when you're making these statements, it does have implications on who we can consider for hiring. And I feel that it limits our opportunities to hire individuals because of microaggressions that rise up during the recruiting practices. And so that is something that I'm seeing particularly right now. And what I have been able to do is when I saw that they didn't have specific questions that connected to my area of student support services, I went and created a whole document. When you're looking at these particular candidates, here are questions that you need to ask for any teacher about being responsibly inclusive when you're looking at a specific candidate for EAL, so that it's not so much the I don't remember the specific statement. I caught it. I didn't, but I was able to write down the myths. And I can definitely say that that's one of the myths that I'm living in these last few weeks when looking at certain candidates, specifically when we're looking at internal candidates who currently fill the role of an educational assistant and limiting their opportunities to be considered for even an interview for teaching capacity. And it seems as though microaggressions are happening in that realm, and it does impact the opportunities for our educational assistants to build their capacity in these areas.
I think
So I just connected to what you had on the bubble for myth of
meritocracy. Yes, absolutely. You are absolutely right. And the fact that it made you uncomfortable when you saw the statement, I would like you to look at the framework created by Harvard Business Review. When you know it's intentional, you name it as microaggression, you disarm it, you defy it, and then you make a decision. So having the framework in place in your work environment and just telling people that this is where we are, it's an intentional microaggression. We need to do something about it. So I think that framework can really help you because it's what I'm trying to share is it's a lack of awareness. It's lack of naming what's happening. And by just starting at the grassroots level of naming it is the first step towards doing something about it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I have started naming things. When I made the comment that I couldn't add to the Padlet, it was specifically where no one was naming a specific attack that I was receiving through one of our staff members from an email that was written in a collaborative approach, myself, head of school, deputy principal, but then all the comments specifically targeted, placed me as being a harasser, someone who is bullying, because I'm informed someone your lack of response is a form of insubordination, because I was the messenger of all of the other individuals who were part of this. The microaggressions were directly towards myself, and these statements were being delivered through chats, through WhatsApp, through other messages, but because we were all collaborating on this concern, they were consistently shared. So when I realized that no one else is addressing each time there was a response, the statement, how will I be supported so that I'm not targeted by Renee or harassed? I actually actually had a conversation with Jessa Wei Wong, and we talked about it and looked at some steps. Okay, going in there rationally and stating what are some positive things that we have been doing, where else have we seen this type of oppressive negative language, and when naming it, it kind of like, oh yes, I didn't realize that that's what this was. And so that opened up a different conversation because no one was naming it. No one was bringing it to the table. These emails and chats were coming through and no one was responding to it. I couldn't go in and act irrationally emotional. So I went in strategically and brought forth the concerns and then named different occurrences of where they were happening and how do we approach it if this was directed to the head of school who is a white man, the middle school principal who is a white female. But when it's coming from the Black Director of Student Support Services woman, no one is stepping up and addressing it. So that has been, you know, when you say it's important to name it, you do have to go and name it, but not be emotional about naming it. And then also identify when is it most appropriate to name it, because if I didn't name it at that point, it could have continued on and it did stop. So someone eventually went back and addressed the nature of the statements that were being shared.
I appreciate the fact that you have the courage to share it with us, and we can continue this conversation, but what I would encourage you to do is reflect on what you exactly said right now. I can see that you have a key takeaway. Start by naming it, and we can continue this discussion if you like. I would invite someone else to also share with us the question that I asked: if you faced such a situation, has consequence-based approach helped? Like Renee shared with us, it hasn't helped probably. Or has there been any strategy that is put in place which will help all of us to come up with another tool? I know it's a hard ask, so I'm not going to push for it. But what we are going to do is, you will have all the resources that I've researched and put together, and try and use some of the tools that we discussed, the Harvard Business Review based tool, the restorative practices tool, and get back to me. You can reach me on my email at editor@tieonline.com, and we can have our discussions. You can also write about it, and we can see how we can make the entire international education community more aware and starting to address these issues at the very grassroots level. That's all from me. Any last questions or comments or feedback you have? Okay, no. So over to you, Kevin. Thank you so much for having me today. Hopefully we can continue with this conversation as we move ahead.
Definitely. Let's give Shwetangna some virtual love, either in chat or your using your reactions. We appreciate you so much. A very powerful session, one that everybody in our ecosystem needs to take part of. And we talk about this frequently in terms of like, what are some things that all leaders, all teachers in our ecosystem need to be made aware of. And this is definitely one of those sessions. And so we're glad to have her back again. We thank you all for joining us. If you're seeing the recording, thank you for joining the recording. Our ALOC conference is up and coming in January 26th to 28th. Go to our website, aloc.org, and click on conference. So we hope to see some of you there. If you miss out, the 2025 location will be announced coming soon. And just other work that we're doing, the task force. Again, if you are not part of that, we highly recommend you get active with that. There's a lot going on. We encourage folks. I know we have folks here who are part of our DEIJ certificate program, which we're starting. They started cohort 1, cohort 2 will start next summer. But just again, this community is for everybody. And this community is really about change, and it's about addressing things that historically have not been addressed. And we so appreciate you all for being here, as well as Shwetangna. And we are out of here. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.